You know, we've talked many times about the reality of the kingdom of the world and the fact that there are only two kingdoms here on this planet. And the Bible is very, very clear about that. There's the kingdom of the world that is buoyed up by the spirit of the age, and there's the kingdom of God. Now, just as the kingdom of God is not dependent upon national boundaries, the kingdom of the world isn't either. And so the names may change, but the spirit of the age has always been at work. And so we have been looking at the history of the Bible, the history of the world as told through the eyes of the scriptures. And the last time we were together, we saw the fall of Babylon. And so you would think that, okay, Babylon went down, everything's going to be fine, right? Well, no, we'll find out today as we look next on digging deeper at the reality of the kingdom of the world and how it crosses throughout national boundaries. Now remember the last time we were together, we looked at the end of the Babylonian Empire. Babylon was the star in the Middle East. And it shined bright, and it shaped the world for centuries, actually. In fact, Babylon completely changed the way that conquered people groups were treated. The Babylonians believed that the best way to keep the peace was to assimilate those who found themselves under their protection. Read that as conquered peoples. Now, Nebuchadnezzar would bring the best and the brightest that he found in his campaigns, and he would bring them to Babylon. He would change their names and teach these young men to think Babylonian. And this worked for the most part. In fact, the Babylonian civil service was the standard for centuries. And in fact, but Rome took it to new heights. But this idea of a civil service in the government, it began with Babylon. And this approach did bring about peace, but it didn't foster loyalty. And those who worked in the system survived because they were efficient. And so last week, we looked at the fall of Babylon to the Persians. Now, according to the Babylonian Chronicles, Babylon fell on October 13th, 539 BC. Now, I know there are some liberal scholars who are quick to point out that Darius the Mede or Darius the Mede didn't actually exist. Therefore, Daniel didn't exist either, and the book was written as an allegory to teach certain moral lessons. Now, I had the honor to teach and to speak at Goodwin College in the Earth Sciences Department. I spoke there for a number of years. And I would lecture a couple times a year. And the lecture I would give was looking at what happens when we are searching for certainty versus searching for truth. That we find that when we are searching for certainty, we'll see things that don't exist, we won't see things that do exist, and then we'll try to get rid of whoever doesn't agree with us. And this is a great example of searching for certainty. That because there are scholars who, because of their presuppositions and they want to go for certainty, they don't see what's there, and they do, and they'll see what's not there, and then they come up with faulty conclusions. With just a little bit of digging, the supposed controversy is settled. See, the Babylonian historical records, and it records for us a man by the name of Gaburu, who was a Mede, who was appointed by King Cyrus to be ruler in Babylon at the time. Now, Gaburu, according to history, was born in 601 BC, which would make him 62 years old, which was when he invaded Babylon, which was exactly the age found in Daniel chapter 5, verse 31, where it says, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So I think it's reasonable anyway to say that this Gaburu is actually Darius the Mede. May have been a title. I don't know, but I think that that makes the most sense. So at least we have the right person who is a Mede in the right place. And the only thing we have a difference is he being called by his title or is he being called by his name? Not something that is new in looking at antiquity at all. Now, this same account in the Babylonian Chronicles says that Darius the Mede, or Gaburu, installed sub-governors in Babylon. Again, just as the book of Daniel records. So even the Babylonian Chronicles, we see this. Now, I'm going into the history again, not to bore you to death, but to remind you that we are not looking at some great book of fables written to teach maybe certain truths. This is not Aesop here. We are looking at the actual human history. And we're seeing God working in and through his people even when they are out of the land of promise. And that's a very, very important subtext behind the book of Daniel. In fact, I would argue that may be the main point of the book of Daniel to the children of Israel. I think there'll be a bigger point later on in time, but for now, we can at least see that God is working even when they are outside of the land. I think that's going to be very, very important to his people for the next couple of thousand years. Now, we noted that the book of Daniel, in fact, points out the fact that the system of the world wants to assimilate the people of God into its mold. And this is not going to change. This is not going to change even though Daniel now has a new master. Instead of having Nebuchadnezzar in Persia, now he's got the Persians are now in place. So we now have a new master. And we see this in Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. Where it says, "Now it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be throughout the whole kingdom. And over them 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps would give account, and so that the king might suffer no loss. And then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other presidents and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom." So the Persians are now in control. And Cyrus, through Darius, set the political prisoners free because he believed in keeping as much of the bureaucracy in place as possible. And so he put people who knew the lay of the land in charge of the day-to-day operations and running of this part of the kingdom. He's got a huge kingdom. This makes the most sense. It's the most efficient way of doing things. And now we would call them career bureaucrats today. They would be the deep state. And Daniel was one of the 3 who were on the top of that ladder. And he was trusted by the Babylonians, and so he was kept in his position in this new government. And Daniel proved to be trustworthy, but he was a follower of Yahweh, who was a man of integrity. So this should not surprise us. But we don't have to go that far to find an old problem. And that's in Daniel chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, where we read this. It says, "And then the presidents and the satraps sought to find ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, 'We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God.' And then these presidents and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, 'O King Darius, live forever.' Now all the presidents of the kingdom and the prefects and the satraps and the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction, that whoever makes a petition to any god or man for 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. And now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. And therefore King Darius signed the document and the injunction." And so what we find here is we find that the others are jealous of Daniel. Why is that? Because Daniel's successful. Because he's a man of integrity, he's trusted. And so we should learn this, that people who are servants of Yahweh, who is a trustworthy God and a faithful God, should be like him as well, and Daniel was. And he was different from the other bureaucrats in the kingdom. He was extremely trustworthy, and he made a difference in his sphere of influence. And for years, he was in Nebuchadnezzar's corner. And then he began to serve a new master, but he served this new master with the same integrity that he served the old master. And so the other people who were jealous of him, they tried to find something with which they could accuse him so they could work themselves further up the ladder. But they couldn't, because Daniel was above reproach. And so they had to point out that Daniel had divided loyalties. That was the only hope that they had, was it had to be something in regards to his God. And think about this, folks. What a great thing to have said about you, that we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. So those who were jealous of Daniel knew that the only way to get him out of the way was to show that Daniel's allegiance was first and foremost to Yahweh and not to the kingdom of Persia. And so what they did was they asked the king to force the issue. And because, again, remember, the issue here is conformity. Because remember, the ancients didn't care if a person actually believed that they were the gods they were worshiping, that they actually even existed. They didn't care. You only had to go through the motions. And they knew that Daniel would not go through the motions. And that he was convinced that he should have no other God except Yahweh. So Daniel was known as a man who would not sacrifice his principles for security, even though he was not living in the land of promise. Daniel believed his God was still God. And so now we have a new punishment in verses 10 to 18. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day, and he prayed, and he gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. And these men came by agreement. And they found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. And then they came near, they said before the king, concerning the injunction, "O king, did you not sign this injunction? That anyone who makes petition to any god or any man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered, and he said, "This thing stands fast according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." And then they answered and said before the king, "Daniel is one of the exiles from Judah, and he pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction that you have signed, but he makes his petition 3 times a day." And then the king, when he had heard these words, was much distressed. And in fact, he set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. And then these men came by agreement to the king, and they said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or ordinance the king establishes can be changed." And then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought in, and he was cast into the den of lions. And the king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you." And a stone was brought in and laid on the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. And then the king went to his palace. He spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. You see, Darius thought this was a good idea, and so he signed the decree. And I don't think that he had absolutely any idea that this would cost him the one man of the kingdom that he could trust. He had no frame of reference for that. Because again, remember, assimilation and conformity is the goal. And if not, then it's off to the lion's den. So I don't think that he actually believed that anybody would actually stand up against it, because let's be honest, for the most part, people are going to conform. And so not only do we have a new punishment, but now we also have an old response by God. And we find this in Daniel chapter 6, beginning verse 19, where it says, "And then the king went to his palace, and he spent the night fasting, and no diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. And then at the break of day, the king rose, and he went in haste to the den of lions. And as he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. And the king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve, continually been able to deliver you from the lions?" And then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." And then the king was exceedingly glad. And he commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. And so Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought out and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them, and they broke all their bones in pieces. I mean, just imagine with me the shock that Darius must have had when he went down to the lion's den in the morning, and Daniel was still there. I mean, nothing was right. He had no way of actually even seeing this, because his gods were absolutely powerless. He had nothing to compare this with. In fact, his gods, they never responded to him. Why is that? Because they're false gods. They were silent. I mean, in fact, you only recognize them after the fact. If we win the battle, then the gods were on our side. And if we lose, then he obviously isn't. You see, his gods were made in his image. So he had nothing to compare this with. And so here he is, confronted by a God who is in control of all creation, even hungry lions. And Darius knew he knew what was going on. He knew that there was jealousy in the realm, and that Daniel had been set up. And so he acted swiftly, and he acted harshly. He had all those who were against Daniel and their families thrown into the lion's den. And the Bible records for us that they were torn to bits. You see, God was vindicated again. And so out of this, we have a new decree. In verses 25 to 28, where it says, "And then King Darius wrote to all the peoples and nations and the languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all of my royal dominion, people are to tremble and to fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and he rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. And he who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian." You see, there is nothing in the life of Darius the Mede that would give us any indication that he became a follower of Yahweh. But there is evidence that the Persians became very tolerant of the Jews. Because you see, Darius understood that the Jewish God was the most powerful God in all the world. He is the head of the pantheon, no different than what Nebuchadnezzar felt. Darius, like Nebuchadnezzar, responded through his theological lens. He couldn't go exclusively with Yahweh, but he could acknowledge the supremacy of the Jewish God. And he not only allowed the followers of Yahweh to worship him alone, but he made it a protected religion throughout the Persian Empire. In other words, he gave them preference. And it says that Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian. And I might add that Persia prospered during the life of Daniel, the follower of the one true God. And so what does this tell us, folks? It tells us a couple of things. First of all, it tells us that our lives matter. That there's always the temptation to give in, because the kingdom of the world, what they want to do is they want to assimilate us into its kingdom. That is what it wants to do. And it's been pretty effective over the years. But God needs one person to stand up, or it could be three, like it was with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He doesn't need much. God works through a remnant, And so as our world gets further and further closer to being under the power and the realm of the kingdom of the world, you never know how much of a difference one life can make. And so I would pray that we would be encouraged by the life of Daniel. We would see that time and time again how God has chosen to bless the remnant and how he has worked in the remnant. Now, sometimes the remnant didn't survive it, but God always did something through them because God is faithful, and he will always reward those who diligently seek him and those who serve him. And so I pray that, again, that you're encouraged by these words. I pray that you, that as you're living your life, as you're going through life, and difficult times come and go, that you would remember the account of Daniel and his friends and understand how God works, even when we're not in the land of promise, even when it seems as though God is still far off, but God is still at work in his people, and ultimately he wants to change lives, and he may use you to change the lives of somebody that you may know. Could be in your sphere of influence. And so I pray that as you are worshiping this week with your siblings in Christ, that you have a phenomenal time, that you would sense God's presence there. And I look forward to seeing you again in a future video. God bless y'all.